Josh Stokes is an award-winning low-country lawyer, a James Allen resident, a husband and father who now wants to become the next mayor of the town of James Allen. I speak exclusively with Josh for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Josh Stokes, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you are a father, a husband, an award-winning lawyer, a James Allen resident, and a former James Allen Town Council member. Now you're asking the residents of James Allen to consider you as mayor. Let me ask you this, Josh. Why James Allen mayor? Why now?
Well, Quintin, since I came off town council in 2019, I have really missed being of public service to the community. I did get a little bit of that aspect back when I started serving on the charter board for James Allen Charter High School a year ago, and I have thoroughly enjoyed doing that, and I'm still serving on that board currently. But it reignited in me a need for public service and to do things for my community. I want to try and help James Allen. I want my kids to be able to enjoy James Allen as they get older. I want their kids to be able to do that. I want the same thing for my friends and family that are on this island. I want them to enjoy James Island for years and generations to come, and I want to try and help shape that.
Okay. How do you make James Allen competitive today, Josh, so that they can actually be better tomorrow?
So I wouldn't say, Quintin, it's making James Island competitive. I think a lot of it is preserving the James Island that we have. This isn't an aspect of let's drive businesses to James Island and try and increase revenue generation or anything like that. James Island's fantastic. It is my favorite place in the Low Country. That's why I live here with my family and I'm raising my kids here. My wife and I love it. I've been on James Island for about 20 years at this point in time. Development's going to happen. There is going to be growth. We can't stop that completely, but I think it's an eye towards maintaining the parts of James Island that make it the wonderful community it is. It is a smaller community in a larger city. It has that community feel where people are looking after their neighbors. They're looking after their neighbors' kids. If I hear about something that my kids have done before they get home, that's the kind of community I want to live in.
What parts of James Allen are, right now very compatible, and where exactly do you see the growth right now?
So we've got there's not a lot of area for growth in the town of James Island itself. More of the area that would allow for growth or development is in the city, but there are some pockets of different things. There's the Dills Bluff property that's owned by the James Island PSB currently, and is under contract for sale to a developer, and there's some development issues going along with that right now. So that is one piece, but that's about 7 acres total. So it's not an enormous tract of land, but it is a decent tract of land where something can be done there. Folly Road is always going to be an issue related to development. The Rethink Folly Road project is a long-term redevelopment project that takes time, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things that the town can do in conjunction and cooperatively with the city and the county to move some of that redevelopment along and make sure that it's cohesive across the island. So I would say Folly Road is probably your area that's going to be the most changed in the near future, but there are little pockets of the town in different areas that could see some development.
So with the Rethink Folly Road plan, Josh, what exactly can the city and the county do right now to help you all?
Well, incentivizing business owners to redevelop. We have empty storefronts right now and trying to find ways to get business owners in there. I love to see local business owners, but we also have larger national chains on James Island that are owned by local James Islanders. So it's not an issue of it being a specific type of business, although I would love to see more local mom and pop type shops, but it's incentivizing business owners to be there and stay there. I don't think that environment's there right now, and it doesn't give them that opportunity to come in and manage the difficulties of permitting and developing and issues like that can take quite a long time. And it's harder for a smaller mom and pop type business to wade through those waters than it is a larger. Open.
Yes, sir. And I lost you, unfortunately, for a second there, but I got the gist of what you were saying earlier. But let me ask you, how many moms and pop businesses are there currently on James Island?
There are still a good many. And when I say mom and pop, I guess I'm referring to not as many national chains. So we still have things like Paisanos.
Yes.
More than one local country rooted business. Same thing is true of Bohemian Bowl. They're franchising, but again, it's still a locally owned business. And then obviously we've got things like Zaxby's and Chick-fil-A, but those two businesses are national chains, but they are owned by local James Island residents. So all of these people are working and living in our community, and I'd like to encourage more of that type of development and businesses on James Island, restaurants that are locally owned. So we've got a new one that's opening on Harborview Road very soon, hopefully. But the Harlow has been in the works for quite a while, and so I'm waiting for that one to open. And then we have other local businesses. We had one recently that had to shut down, hopefully temporarily. I'm not sure exactly why that was. But again, we can try and help these business owners to make sure that they have the incentives that they need to stay open and serve our communities, because James Island needs that.
Yes, sir. And I want to go back to that in just a second, Josh, but let me talk to you about the Marshwalk Villas proposal. As you just mentioned, the 6.5 acres of land is something that the James Island Public Service District wants to sell. Town council and the mayor voted down the plan for 20 townhouses and a shopping center. Now the developer is coming back to show a plan of, I believe, 10 single-family houses and the rest reserved with Greenbelt funds for the park. Uh, how would you vote on that new plan the developer is bringing in right now?
So the developer hasn't actually brought that plan, Quintin. They showed that plan or that potential option at a intergovernmental council meeting that was on James Island last week, but specifically said in that other intergovernmental council meeting that they had not brought that forward as a proposal. It was an idea at that point in time, but nothing had happened with it. I do think that's a good proposal. It would preserve almost 2 acres of that land, and then have some single family residential. There was a little disconnect about the developer. The proposal that they showed had about 10 houses on it, but in his talk he said it would be 15. So there's still some nuances that would have to be worked through with that to see what would happen with that particular proposal, but it has not been brought to the town at this point in time. What they have brought, so the original PD was to move the commercial section up towards Dills Bluff Road, which there's about a little over an acre, a little less than an acre and a half that's zoned community commercial right now, and then the remainder of it is zoned single family residential. And so their PD was to move that up and make a couple of other changes that were technically more restrictive than the zoning would be as it is right now. That plan is the one that was turned down by council. Since then, the developer has filed for permits related to building a 3-story storage unit on the commercial portion. So, to my understanding, that is the only proposal that is actually, I will say the only separate proposal other than the Marshwalk PD that has actually been put in front of town staff at this point in time. And as far as that community commercial portion of the property goes, a storage unit is a facility that can be built there by right without extra permissions from the town. Now, that does not mean that if they're asking to remove trees or if they're asking to make any other zoning changes, that they might not have to go in front of the Planning Commission or the BZA to address those issues. But as far as what they're asking to build on that particular portion by right, they would be allowed to do that. So again, this gets to one of those situations that this process with the Marshwalk PD has been going for about a year. And it's really hard to come in at the very back end of something when it's finishing and try and redo everything at that point in time. What needed to happen was the town needed to be proactive about this earlier on in the process and find other options for ways to do this. One of them may very well be that portion, that idea and concept that preserves a portion of the property and potentially allows single family residential on the other portion. And I will work very hard with the developer in this process. It's obviously not going to be decided before November 7th. So if I'm lucky enough to be elected by the residents of James Island, I will go in there and get right to work trying to manage that situation at this point in time to make sure that we get the best thing that we can for James Island. But my concern has always been, if you just say no to issues without any kind of alternative in place or working towards an alternative of some kind that's going to be better, you may end up with the worst possible option. And in my particular view, I really don't want to see a 3-story storage unit on Dills Bluff Road. I don't think that's a good use of space, and I don't think that's what's needed there.
Do you think council will vote that down?
So I guess it depends on who's going to be on council. So it's still got to go through the and ultimately come before town council if it needs town council's approval. It's hard to say, and I have not seen the plan itself. I just know that plan was proposed and that it's requesting a 3-story storage building. And so initially I will say I'm not in favor of that. I don't think that's the right place or the right thing that needs to go there. But I'd need to look more into that to know for sure, and then to say what else might happen in the future for that.
And Josh, let me ask you, what other zoning changes need to happen right now with that?
As far as rezoning the property itself?
Yes, sir.
Well, that gets into a really sticky situation, Quintin, because if you rezone a property, whatever the value of that property is, if the town rezones it and changes that value, the town's then responsible to the owner for the value change. So that creates a big issue. Now, where there might not be as much of a concern are situations where potentially the deal is reworked with the PSD that the town purchases a portion of the property. Then at that point in time, the town can rezone that property because it owns it. And so if it wants to rezone it into something like a park because it's able to put that there, then they can do that. And it's not gonna change the value of that property for an owner where the town then has to pay out. But if we were to try and come in, the whole property for sale is $2 million. If the town were to come in and try and rezone that property and change its zoning to where it couldn't be developed commercially and or residentially, then if it takes the value away, then the town's on the hook for that. So if it goes from $2 million to $500,000, the town's responsible for that $1.5 million.
Wow. Now, when with the rest of that property, which they want to preserve, obviously for Greenbelt funds for a park, how much Greenbelt funds are available right now?
So the town has about $750,000 available now for Greenbelt funds. So not quite, if you look at the whole value of the property, not quite half of that, but you're coming pretty close to half of it. And so I think there are definitely some ways to work towards preserving that property and doing it in a way that's going to be beneficial to the residents of James Island.
What exactly are residents saying about this proposed property?
Well, Quintin, it's one of those situations where you hear a lot from the residents that are directly around it. So the neighborhoods that are close by, we're hearing a lot from them. White House Plantation is right there in that property. The original development would back right up to White House Plantation, so we heard from a lot of residents in White House Plantation. Then you hear from some other residents around the area, but you don't necessarily hear from everybody. So you've got to take the opinions that you hear, and you got to make those right decisions. But the voices that were heard were typically against the Marshwalk PD development, the planned development.
Right.
Again, this idea of potentially doing something smaller that has preserved green space that would abut and back up to White House Plantation has not been a proposal that's been made to town council, and so there haven't been any community engagement, or hasn't been any community engagement or involvement related to that proposal since it hasn't actually been made at this time.
And let me go back to Folly Road for just a second. What kind of redevelopment do you actually visualize for Folly Road?
Well, I think so. The Rethink Folly Road project, some of the really good things that are in there for redevelopment is actually, as things are redeveloped, shifting properties back farther from the road so that there's more of a buffer with Folly Road. You've seen it in some places that have been developed. For example, the Chick-fil-A, the new refuel gas station that was built in the city, larger multi-use paths in front of the property. So instead of a smaller sidewalk, developing it into a larger, I think it's 8 feet at a minimum, I believe is what the Rethink Folly Road project says, but I'd have to look back at those guidelines. But a larger multi-use path, then with buffering between that path and the actual building site itself. So I think the refuel gas station is a really good example of that, where you walk up to, or when you drive up and see that gas station, you've got the multi-use path out front. You have plantings and beds and between the multi-use path, and then a small, I say fence, but wood fence that has some brick columns for it. And then you actually get into the gas station property itself. And then, but the gas station is, instead of turned towards facing the road, It's actually turned sideways and you're not staring right at the gas pumps necessarily. So that's a lot of what that Rethink Folly Road project is as you redevelop these properties, what are ways that we can redevelop better, that we can give more frontage space and access to residents and walking and things like that on Folly Road while still allowing these businesses to redevelop and operate. Same thing happened with the oil change, Take 5 oil change, and the Sherwin-Williams when those were redeveloped and built. The multi-use paths in front of those. And the downside is it takes time because you've got to develop individual properties, and it's not the city coming in and saying, city or the town coming in and saying these things have to happen now. It happens as part of a redevelopment project. And so it can be a little frustrating because you see those multi-use paths and they're great, but they're in front of one building and then they're not in front of the next building. So it's a long process, but it's a way to go in and improve the look of Folly Road to make it something that's easier. And then as we get more space to allow for better traffic control, hopefully. But Folly Road sees a lot of traffic. And we're not going to change the fact that it sees a lot of traffic. It's going to continue seeing it. So looking at ways that we can continue to improve the road infrastructure, lighting and signalization is always important. But we know that we're going to have traffic. And if we're not dealing with that on a daily basis, then we're behind the times.
And I've been out to James Allen a couple of times just recently over at Sherwin-Williams, so I know all about that multi-use path. But where else exactly can those multi-use paths be ideal for Folly Road?
Well, the idea would be that for that whole Rethink Folly project and the Folly Road corridor is that multi-use path would go from the top to the bottom. So I think it can absolutely be done as things are, but this is where the redevelopment comes in. If we came in right now and said, we're going to take this much space as right of way and do a multi-use path here that's 8 feet wide at a minimum through the whole thing, we couldn't do that without tearing buildings down. And so as buildings are redeveloped and that happens naturally, it allows for that to occur. There might be ways that we can incentivize businesses to potentially do that redevelopment sooner. And so that's certainly something we need to look at so that we can take a project that's already a long-term project and maybe try and decrease the amount of time that it takes to get something like that done.
What long-term project is in place right now?
That's the Rethink Folly Road project. So that has guidelines related to it about what happens when redevelopment occurs, and that is a multi-governmental project that was put together and agreed to by city, county, and town to try and deal with redevelopment as it occurs on Folly Road.
And what buildings on Folly Road have been redeveloped thus far?
So that's like we've talked about. The Refuel's the most recent one that's been redeveloped. We had the oil change, Take 5 oil change, Sherwin-Williams. Let's see, Zaxby's was redeveloped. I'm trying to think as I go down the road which other ones have had that at this point in time. The new urgent care emergency facility for Trident Hospital on Folly Road.
Yes, right.
That was just redeveloped and opened about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and they had to do that as a part of it. So it is happening. It just happens slowly, unfortunately.
And Josh, let me ask you, what frontal space is available currently on Folly Road?
Well, I mean, there are commercial spaces on. Let's see, as far as on Folly, I think there's a couple commercial spaces in some of the shopping centers that are available. The one at Camp Road right now is actually full, I believe. That one's been filled up at this point in time, so that's good. But that was sort of one of the concerns, at least one of the concerns I had related to the Marshwalk PD, was that original PD was going to have commercial space and have sort of multi-use but commercial space on the bottom. And the question was, well, if we've already got other areas that are not filled at this point in time and available, we're building more, and that might just exacerbate that particular situation. But I think there are some spaces potentially in the shopping center that's at the corner of Camp and Folly. And then it's just kind of a hit or miss. There are some empty houses as you go down Folly that aren't in shopping centers but are zoned in more of a commercial residential zoning, combined zoning. But we have that as you go down Folly too. That's once you get to a little below Camp Road, those houses start at that point.
And you talk about those multi-use paths. So where can the lighting signals be changed in those areas?
Well, so the signalization is not really related to the multi-use paths at all. I mean, the signals are where they are at this point in time, Camp and Folly Road, and those are going to be set in place. But we tend to have, I drive Folly Road every day. The traffic's not fantastic. But where I tend to see major problems is as we get into the afternoons and actually heading up Folly Road, sort of off of James Island, it gets backed up until about the connector. And so I think it's just working on those signals and the amount of time that they're green for one particular direction and trying to maximize that. And again, that changes. It's a tough job because that can change many times throughout the day. It might need to be different in the mornings than it is in the middle of the day, and different in the afternoons than it is in the evenings. It can also change for the season. So during the summer and we have more traffic on Folly, it might need to be different than it is during the school year. And so that's a big issue. I've got 2 kids right now that are at Camp Road Middle School. And so we typically will cross Folly Road on Camp to get over. And traffic backs up there enormously because that light is very short. It tries to keep Folly Road moving, and then it's very short on Camp Road crossing. So it's just a matter of trying to address those issues and come up with something. It's like a lot of the rest of James Island. One size doesn't fit all. So you're not going to have one, in my opinion, you're not going to have one signalization plan that works for the entire day, every day of the year. It probably needs to be more dynamic than that, work based on school times, work traffic, coming to, or going to work and coming from work, as well as addressing the summer and the different traffic that we see once summer's here and we have more people going to the beach.
And what are those different patterns that you all are looking at currently?
So the town does not actually control the signalization. That's actually done by the city mainly in general. Okay. But that's where I come to one of my other key points of my campaign is that we've got to find a way to cooperate more with our local and neighboring municipalities. So the town has not always had the best relationship with the James Island Public Service District or the city or the county of Charleston. And I think that kind of comes naturally to some extent. The town was born out of a fight. And that fight sort of has persisted since the town has been incorporated for the 4th time and continued on for the last 10 years. But at this point in time, I feel like the town has to mature and it has to move forward in not arguing with our neighboring municipalities, but working with them to develop cooperative relationships. And I think that's the only way that we're going to have a say in how James Island proceeds as an island overall. If we want to have a say in what happens with Folly Road, if we want to have more of a say in what happens with the development in the city and what their zoning regulations are, for example, related to density and single-family residential and multi-unit dwellings, if we want to have an influence on that, we're not going to have that influence if we're arguing with them constantly. If we can create a cooperative relationship with them and say, listen, we've worked together on these things, we want to continue to work together on these things, but then let's talk about some of these other issues too. Density. This is why density is an issue on James Island, and we'd like for you guys to try and align more with our density and what we do than what you have for other parts of the city. What works on James Island is not going to necessarily work in West Ashley. What works on James Island is not necessarily going to work downtown. What works on James Island is not going to work on Daniel Island. And so it's easier for the town because the town is all on the island and we can focus just on the island. But we've got to help bring the city and the county into thinking about the town and the island as a whole as a different area of Charleston, a borough, so to speak, that needs to be handled differently than it is being handled right now.
How dense is the town of James Island?
So, do you mean as far as what our single-family residential density is?
Yes, sir.
So, for a single-family residential home, the set density is 1/3 of an acre per lot. So, 3 houses per acre, versus the city and the county, which are at about 4 houses per acre, a little bit less. But the town does not have multi-use zoning. So, we don't have areas that we've zoned as, a while back, we heard zoning in the city related to gathering place zoning. We don't have anything like that, and would like to try and avoid those types of developments on James Island because of the amount of space that it uses. And I understand the arguments for density, but I don't think it's appropriate and fits in with the character of James Island.
Well, let me just ask you an obvious question. Would
Sure.
you ever consider banning chain stores and business like some cities and towns have done?
I don't think a government's job is to ban businesses. If people want to come in and operate, I think we need to incentivize businesses that we'd like to be there. But if a person owns a piece of property, I'm a big advocate of property owners' rights. Government needs to be limited, and if they do interfere and say that you can or cannot do something, it needs to be limited in nature for a particular purpose. I think that steps a little far. But I think people need to be able to make those decisions to do with their businesses what they want to.
Do you believe that property owners should be able to buy a residential property in the town of James Allen and actually rent it out as a short-term rental?
So I think the short-term rental ordinances on James Island need to be addressed whole cloth. They currently actually just made a change where they lumped short-term rentals in with bed and breakfasts, which I don't think makes sense. The two are not analogous, and I don't think they need to be managed together. And then currently the rules, the larger rules related to short-term rentals say nothing less than 30 days unless you live on the property and are there the whole time that the renters are there, essentially. So if I had an extra room in my house, I could rent that out for a night or 7 nights or 2 weeks, but I could do it for less than 30 days. I think the purpose behind that is to make sure that we have owners that are paying attention to their property, they're paying attention to their renters, and they're not letting people come in that are just going to, party all night long, disturb their neighbors, cause problems, cause trash, and create those issues within neighborhoods. And I understand that, but I don't know that that's the best way to manage that and to limit that at that point in time. If I owned my house and I owned another house right next to it, I could still be there and manage that house and make sure everything's happening that way. But I don't live on it, and so then I wouldn't be able to rent it for less than 30 days at that point in time. So I think that's an issue. I think we need to look at that all across the board. And for me, it's got to be a balance. Again, a balance between property owners' rights, where if they've bought a property and they want to rent that out, they should be able to do that. But balancing it against the rights and comfort and home of our neighbors and neighborhoods. So I think we need to look at better regulations that dictate how we do these short-term rentals and how we can potentially address them if they're a problem. Does that mean that we limit the number of short-term rentals that can happen on James Island, sort of like what Folly has done? I don't think a specific number makes a lot of sense, so that's not the direction I would probably go. Does it mean that we do a process like permitting, where you have to apply for a permit and you have to renew that permit annually, and maybe in that situation, if there are complaints about a property, those are addressed during the permitting and or renewal process for that permit? To me, that sounds like a reasonable approach, because it starts to allow the homeowners adjacent to a rental property to say, these are the problems we've been seeing, or to come in and say, they've been renting their house for a year and we haven't noticed anything. It's been great. We absolutely support them continuing to rent their property. They take really good care of it and we appreciate them being there. I think that can happen both ways. And so it's looking at that issue to decide what's going to make the most sense, again, for James Island. And I don't think what makes the most sense for short-term rental zoning on or regulations on Folly or downtown makes the same sense for James Island. We've got to look at it for our island and see what's going to work best.
How many resident occupied homes are there on James Island?
So as far as exact homeowner, I'll tell you this: we've got about 11,500 registered voters, and I think that works out to about 8,000 households in the town. Specifically, so that does not include the city of Charleston residents. That does not include unincorporated county residents, but it's somewhere right around there. But I'm not exactly positive of the household numbers.
Now, in regards to the rule where a developer cannot bring back a plan once it's been denied for at least 1 year to a government entity, what is your view on that particular rule from a James Island perspective?
I don't necessarily have an issue with it. There is an allowance, though, that a developer can come back and ask for a waiver of that 1 year and come back sooner with the similar plan. So they can come back and ask for a waiver, or they can wait their 1 year. I don't necessarily think it's a problem. As far as anyone asking for a waiver, I think you got to determine that at the time and see what was the reason it was turned down before. Is there something that's changed that would justify that coming back sooner? Have they potentially let's say they made a proposal that was turned down, but they listened to the community and came back and tweaked their proposal and have done something significantly different that might be more amenable, then I don't have any problem with going ahead and talking about that. Okay. Again, if it's going to get, my personal opinion is you bring it up for a vote and you vote on it. If your vote's a yes, your vote's a yes. If your vote's a no, your vote's a no. But we shouldn't shy away from voting on these issues. That's what the residents of James Island have elected us to do.
And I'm being redundant. This is a stupid question, but should the rule actually be waived?
In some cases, I would say I get what you're saying. If you've got a rule that says you have to wait a year, why would you waive it? If you're going to waive it, why have the rule at all? I agree with that. I think it's to keep somebody. So let's say somebody made a development plan and it was turned down, and they said, "Well, you know what I'll do? I'll just be a thorn in the side, and I will continue to apply for this over and over and bring it back to town council over and over." I think that's the purpose of the rule, is to keep that from happening. So we're not addressing. Once you go through the process and you have to have these approvals, it's not necessarily short, depending on what where they have to go. If they have to go to BZA, if they have to go to the Planning Commission, if they have to go before Town Council, and so it's not something that could come up every single month, most likely. But you don't want to be dealing with the exact same plan every 3 months just because the developer is going to continue to apply for it. So I think that's the purpose of the 1-year rule. If a developer makes some significant changes and addresses issues that were brought up in a previous denial, then I think there's a possibility that waiving that and allowing them to come back sooner and address that can make sense. But you've got to look at that with each instance that comes across and decide whether it's reasonable to do that, or are they just applying for the same thing because they want to keep doing it no matter what.
And this might be another silly question, Josh, but okay, how many of those developers have actually asked for a waiver?
At least from what I remember, Quintin, I think there was one developer that asked for a waiver when I was on town council from 2014 to 2019. So over a 5-year period, I think there was one.
Wow. And speaking of which, as if you become mayor, Josh, how are you actually going to realize all of these projects that the current town council has voted on and funded that has not been done yet, meaning a dock at Brantley Park, renovations to Town Hall, the Camp Road trees preservation projects, and of course, drainage projects?
Sure. So there are a lot of projects that actually are going on. So there are 3 major drainage projects that are happening in the town of James Island right now. But it's a matter of timing. These projects, and I wish they were faster, but these projects can just take time. Once you go through, so for example, a sidewalk, once you go through a proposal and a feasibility study to get a design possibility, then you go through the actual design of it itself. Then you have to go through right-of-way acquisition at that point in time. And if everybody's on board with the sidewalk, the right-of-way acquisition may be very fast. But if people aren't on board with the sidewalk, the right-of-way acquisition may be very slow. And so going through that process, and then once you have the right-of-way acquisition, actually bidding it out, and now a lot of what we're seeing, Quintin, and we discussed this at the Intergovernmental Council meeting last week, is for smaller projects. So there are a couple of intersection improvement projects in the works on James Island. For smaller projects, which I wouldn't even look at an intersection improvement as a small one. I think that's a pretty big project. But they're having difficulty getting contractors to bid on these projects because of the fact that they're smaller. They can make more money doing bigger projects elsewhere, and so then they don't bid on the smaller projects. So now a focus has been to potentially take several of these smaller projects and bundle them together, so that then you can bid it out as one package, and the developer can work on, the contractor can work on all of those projects at the same time and utilize their resources better in that scenario. So there are a whole lot of different issues that go into that, but there's got to be an urgency in town hall, an urgency to move these projects forward and to stay on top of them, and to work. If we've got difficulties with right-of-way acquisition for something, let's go out and talk to those people and let's figure out what their issue is. Is it just they're against it completely, or is it they're concerned about what it's going to do to their neighborhood, and we can talk to them about that and assuage their concerns related to that? But we have to have that urgency. If we don't have that urgency and we're not looking to the next issue that we have to address or next issues in that situation, then we're going to fall behind and we're going to be reactive instead of proactive, which is, I think, closer to what we're doing right now.
How many small projects are in the works right now?
For what kind of project?
Oh, I'm sorry. The intersection.
So intersection improvements.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
So one of the intersection improvements that's in process right now is the Fort Johnson and Camp Road intersection improvement project.
Okay.
Another one is a project that's just up the road from that, Fort Johnson and Secessionville.
Oh, yeah.
There have been multiple other discussions about intersection improvement projects that are on different parts of James Island and not necessarily a part of the town. Those two touch the town, and so they would impact that. But the county is managing those projects. And so the county would be the one to bundle those together and try and handle them at one time, as opposed to bidding them out as single individual projects. So the Camp Road and Fort Johnson Road intersection improvement project is a traffic circle, similar but smaller than the traffic circle that's at Harborview and Fort Johnson. And so because of the amount of space there, it's what they call an urban compact roundabout.
Right.
And so it doesn't have the bed in the middle. It doesn't have the plantings. It's more just a concrete surface, sort of like a curb, but a larger curb section. Because the diameter of the circle or the circumference of the circle is smaller, if trucks can't make that turn or a school bus can't make that turn, they actually just drive over the center of it. And so that works in that area because it minimizes the tree impact. It minimizes the impact because that's right at Stone Post Road, so it minimizes the impact on the historic stone post columns that are there. And so that project has been in the works. But Quintin, this gives you an example of how long this kind of stuff can take. That project has been in the works for 7 years now. And it's at the phase of approval. The last municipality to approve it, or the last municipality that's left to approve it, is the town of James Island. And I think that approval needs to happen. I think it should have happened months ago. But one of the things I'm going to focus on when I get in there is making sure that the county gets the final approval that they need from the town, because that's a safety concern. That intersection, people are going pretty fast on James Island. On Fort Johnson Road, and so it's hard to turn off of Camp Road or Stone Post Road onto Fort Johnson. There have been accidents there. There have been injuries there. That roundabout is desperately needed, and we need to get that done.
And quickly, in 2 minutes, what I have left, Zoom was giving me that 40-minute limit. But
yeah.
What's more ideal for the town of James Island, particularly Folly Road, Camp Road, Fort Johnson? Is it sidewalks, or is it really? I know Folly Road, you can't do traffic circles, but elsewhere, is traffic circles much better than sidewalks?
So traffic circles can be a lot better depending on what's happening on the road. They typically move traffic. Traffic is more of a continuous flow, so they move traffic a little better. Traffic has to slow down, but doesn't come to a stop, and so you improve the safety of the intersection. For that particular intersection improvement project at Fort Johnson and Camp Road, the urban compact roundabout was a better option for traffic flow and safety than the signalized intersection. And it also took up an immensely smaller amount of space than the signalized intersection, because they'd have to add left turn lanes to Fort Johnson, and it would expand the intersection tremendously. The slightly larger roundabout would be a little bit better than the smaller one for traffic flow, but just because it's bigger and traffic can move through there a little easier, but it wouldn't fit the space and it would impact more trees. And so I think roundabouts are great in the right place. I don't think roundabouts fit everywhere, just like we've talked about with other things. So I think it has to be you have to look at the situation, you have to see what's called for there and what's going to work best in that particular location.
And I know that you have said that you want to protect the town's natural resources. Where do trees fit into the plan for protecting the town?
So trees are absolutely something we need to protect as well. But there is a line at which you have to make a decision. And that's, do we do something that's going to benefit the town if it means taking out a tree or two, or do we just protect the trees at all costs? I think protecting the trees is very important, but for example, with that intersection improvement project at at Fort Johnson Road and Camp Road, when that was originally proposed, it would have affected 2 grand trees, and those would have had to be taken out. One of those trees has already been taken out, so we're down to 1 grand tree. It's a safety issue, and that intersection needs to be improved, and it's still, even if we give the approval for that, it's still going to take some time for that to happen. So in my opinion, we don't need to delay on that intersection improvement project. Taking out 1 tree is a reasonable cost in that situation, and we can mitigate that in other places. We can plant other trees, we can protect other trees in other areas, and we can continue to do that and still do the things we need to do to make James Island safer.
Josh Stokes, thank you for your time here on Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.